for my first 2 years of software engineering or being a software engineer, I did some awesome things. I built impactful features. One of them was called Auto Translate, where I leveraged Twilio webhooks and AWS Translate, allowing users to communicate in their native language. I also worked to improve the code base as any software engineer does. I wrote database migrations. I led initiatives to implement automated UI test plans. I managed releases and bug bash sessions, and I fixed high priority bugs. I also managed and mentored interns over the summer. So it was some really cool stuff. But unfortunately, I spent those first 2 years of my career feeling embarrassed, under pressure, incompetent. I was full of anxiety, and I was like, man, I don't think I belong here, and I really want to quit. But I told myself, you know what, this is the way it's supposed to be. Software engineering is hard, and I'm in an environment that I'm not used to, so I'm just going to try to work harder. So I decided I'm going to produce more work. I tried to stay up super late to keep up with the more experienced devs at my job. I decided maybe I need to be smarter. So I pursued my computer science degree at Boston University. And I tried to just constantly prove my worth to myself and my coworkers. And throughout all that, I just didn't recognize any of the awesome work I did. I didn't take time to acknowledge my progress, and I continued to feel like I was not doing well at my job. To my surprise, I realized this is not an isolated experience. As I spoke to other junior developers who I met at different companies or who went to the same coding bootcamp as me, they told me they're having a similar experience, and many of them decided to quit tech altogether. And I was thinking maybe I should quit. But I did end up having a perspective shift when I started teaching people how to code, when I observed how my husband's developer team was treating him, and when I ended up working at a different company and just switching my environment. So to anyone who feels like they're trying to survive in a toxic environment, I just want to remind y'all that you may be able to survive in a toxic environment, but you can't really thrive in a toxic environment. And by changing where I worked and changing my environment, I saw an immediate increase in my confidence. I started to attain peace and a better work-life balance. That's still a work in progress, so I'm not going to say that I'm really doing that great at that part. And I started to get a better understanding or realistic awareness of my strengths and my weaknesses. So no longer was I like, oh man, I am bad at everything. I was like, this is something I'm bad at. This is something I'm good at. And here's how I can improve. I also ended up developing a passion for empowering junior engineers and helping them grow, because this is something I wished that I had as a junior developer. So I'm going to share those tips with you today. But before I do, I want to introduce myself. My name is Rizel Scarlett. I am a developer advocate at GitHub. I worked as a full stack, or I was trained as a full stack engineer, and I worked as a front-end engineer for about 3 years. I'm also the director of programs at G Code House, which is an organization that aims to teach women of color and non-binary people of color about web development. Like I mentioned, I'm passionate about empowering and educating others, especially about technical topics. And I have a passion for learning myself and an addiction to Twitter. So on that note, go ahead and follow me on Twitter, on Hashnode, on Dev.to, on YouTube, and GitHub at Black Girl Bites. All right, so I started to realize that every developer is a teacher. This might be an explicit responsibility in your job description or an implicit responsibility. And when I say that, I mean your sole responsibility, or it's written out in your job description that you're supposed to teach. So this may be someone who's working in a boot camp, whether you're the founder, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a mentor, or someone who's working at a school or a college as a professor, or someone in developer relations. Those people are also, their goal is to teach. Or it may be an implicit responsibility. So it's not written out in your job description, but it's kind of something you have to do. You have to help other people who are less experienced as you. If you're an engineering manager, if you're a senior developer, a mid-level developer, a junior developer, even that, because maybe you'll have some interns that you need to mentor. So, okay, you might be saying, yeah, I'm one of those roles and I am teaching others. But the question is, are you empowering others as you teach? So let's learn how to teach and empower. So, one of the first lessons that I learned in teaching and empowering people is you need to create space for growth. And I learned this by observing my husband's experience. Both of us, before we got married, went to the same coding boot camp at the same time, but we had completely different experiences because his company created space for him to grow. When I moved in with him, I started like eavesdropping and being like, wow, so that's how your company treats you. And this is how they talk to you. And one of the things that I realized is they listen as much or even more than they spoke to him, right? As a mentor, you might feel super excited to share all of your knowledge, but that can be overwhelming to the junior developer, and you may also be ignoring their actual needs. So try to listen and figure out what they want and need to be able to grow. Also, support should always be available. Try to assign designated mentors who actually want to answer questions and prioritize helping new developers. Also, you could try holding office hours so the new developer can feel safe asking questions. Oftentimes, when I had questions, I worked at a startup, so I was like, "Ooh, everyone's really busy. I don't want to bother them." But if you hold office hours like they did for my husband, he knew every Tuesday at 1:30, he can go and ask a question about React, and it wouldn't be shut down. Also, set clear goals and expectations. Junior developers want to know how to not be junior anymore. It's not their goal to stay as a junior forever. They want to know what milestones they can reach to make them feel like they're not stagnant. So make those milestones clear, meet with them regularly, and start checking off those so they can know what to strive for. Also, I learned to lose the ego. And I learned this when I was working at G Code, which I mentioned is an organization that teaches women of color and non-binary people of color to code. So when I was there, I developed the curriculum, or I am currently there, but I developed the curriculum, I taught, and I coached 15 women of color, and we're on our third cohort now. So from there, I learned that I need to be vulnerable. I need to exercise vulnerability. Tech is super rooted in elitism and academia, and it's kind of known that we pretend to know it all, but you have to be honest. You don't know everything. And by being honest, you reduce the pressure for new developers that feel they have to know it all. So I encourage all the mentors and myself at G Code to say, I don't know, let's Google it, so that they can see that it's okay to not know things and they can feel okay with asking questions. Also, don't ask if they've Googled it. I think that's like so common in tech to when someone comes to you and asks a question, you say, have you Googled it? I think the answer is obvious. Yes, they've Googled it. To ask for help or ask a question takes a lot of swallowing of pride, but I understand why people are asking that. They want to lead you to be more independent and develop those problem solving skills. So one way we can do that instead is to have them practice a question framework, but don't do it in a condescending way. Instead, ask them, what's your goal? What have you tried? And what did the result look like? This way, you reduce the time you spend helping them, and you don't make them feel bad for asking for help. And also with that, they may start realizing the pattern and they'll come back to you in the future with these answers or with these questions already answered. Also, know that your teaching style is not exactly the same as their learning style. I learned this the hard way. At G Code, I was using a lot of analogies and things that helped it click for me when I was in my coding bootcamp. And I looked at the students and they all looked confused. And I realized, wait a minute, just because I learned this way and just because it made sense to me this way, doesn't mean it makes sense to them. So you have to learn how to teach the way they learn best. And you have to learn to adapt to their learning preferences and provide options for them to learn the way they need to learn. Also, exercise patience and kindness. I learned about this when I switched jobs. I realized, wow, this is an environment I can thrive in. And I noticed that my managers were practicing these three things that I've listed. So, allowing the developer to reflect between tasks, especially when you're a junior developer, this is very valuable, right? So, after completing a ticket, one of my managers had me write a blog post or take notes. That way, I got a chance to retain what I learned and reflect on what I learned rather than moving from ticket to ticket to ticket and kind of forgetting what I did and really not growing from that. Also, having empathetic code reviews. You want to be thoughtful when providing code reviews. Take your time to read the code properly and provide thoughtful advice. And be kind in doing that too. And let them know when your suggestions are blockers or nitpicks. I think sometimes we have a tendency to be like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And it kind of makes the ticket take longer to get through. If it's something that you're like, okay, for the future, they should use this best practice, suggest that and write, this is a nitpick. You can still merge it, but for the future, try this. But if it's a blocker, something that would mess up the code base, say this is a blocker. Here's how you can try to resolve this issue. And here's why it's a problem. Also, in handling mistakes, I strongly believe you should avoid placing blame when a junior developer makes a mistake. Help them fix the issue and indicate if they indicate that they need help, right? And let them know it's okay, you've made that mistake before. Because I think a lot of times junior developers beat themselves up so much when they make a mistake. You don't need to beat them up too. And half the time, or most of the time, I really think it's leadership's fault if they made a mistake. Because that means, or the team, right? It means that you didn't put enough guardrails in place for the new developer to avoid making those mistakes. So here's just a little example. I don't know if you all remember, but back in the summer, HBO sent out an empty test email. And everyone on Twitter was joking, it must be the intern. Then HBO Max tweeted out, yes, it was the intern. I don't personally think that was okay. Maybe the intern was okay with it, but you never know how someone may react. They may feel really bad inside from that. So it's best to say, hey, it's best to take accountability and say, hey, that was our fault. We did that. And we're going to work to make that better. And then this is the last advice, and this is advice for companies, because all of the things I listed really can't be possible if companies, engineering leaders, and hiring managers aren't making sure these happen. First, you want to make sure your culture is creating an environment for this to happen. And you can do this by encouraging everyone to give positive reinforcement to everyone, but especially early career developers. People are more likely to perform better if they know they're doing well. If their manager's telling them, you're doing a great job, they're going to say, I want to do even better. And genuinely highlight their achievements, even if it's something small to you. Because remember, you've been in this industry for years. So this is something they've done for the first time. And then in terms of hiring, I think there's a tendency to ignore arrogant developers or people who are bad for the culture because they're going to code well. They're super intelligent. They're going to help get the code base to where it needs to be and help put out the features. But I think it's really much more important to make sure you're hiring people who are humble and who would advocate for people who are mistreated. So make sure when you're hiring, you're getting a good balance of intelligence and humility. And then for process, Scrum and Kanban or Kanban, however people want to pronounce it, are popular workflows for developers. And they're great because they encourage developers they help engineering teams complete more tickets. But on the flip side, it makes them focus a bit more on completing tickets over helping each other. So I want to challenge engineering leaders and companies to start thinking about how they can kind of slightly change these methods to prioritize helping each other on your team. And then something simple you can do is just write clear tickets and documentation so junior developers can work confidently. When they get the ticket, they should know what they need to do. It shouldn't be murky or confusing on what they're doing. So just to recap, for anyone who's a senior developer or mid-level or wants to empower and support junior engineers, create space for growth, lose the ego, and exercise patience and kindness. And then for companies, invest in your culture, invest in hiring, and invest in your processes. That is basically it for my talk. Thank you, JS Comp, for letting me speak. And I want to encourage everyone to make the world a better place for early career developers. Does anyone have any questions?